Welcome to the 21st Century Reformation Hour. This is Herman Otten, the editor of Christian News and the pastor of Trinity Lutheran Church in New Haven. I have before me the latest copy of our newspaper, Christian News, May 9, 2011 issue. This week, our lead story is titled Corrections and Assisting and Setting the Record Straight, Power Politics and Missouri Synod. It's on this book here, which Fortress Press has just published. And I begin with using an advertisement that was in the Christian Century. Now, the Christian Century is perhaps the leading ecumenical liberal publication in our nation. It's been going on for over a century. I have protested their insights for, 50 years already. And Martin Marty is the author of the foreword to this book that Fortress Press just published, and he's been with the Christian Century for over 50 years. And Marty and I have been going on at it theologically for over 50 years. Now, what's significant about what we start out by saying is all the reviews now are saying that it's a scholarly work, really brings up all kinds of information that wasn't there before. The American Lutheran Publicity Bureau on their website points out various things. He really unearthed some things which we didn't know before. Well, we sell the book, and I have mentioned it, as some of you know, you read our paper. But now this week, what I've done, I've gone through it at some length, going through it, showing all the different mistakes that are in the book. And how they can possibly call it scholarly is beyond me. Now, perhaps the most significant mistake, as far as I'm concerned, was the one he had on his last page. After he had finished his book, and then he says, I asked Pastor Otten one more question. If you had to live your life over again, would you do the same thing? Would you protest against the theology of the seminary, knowing that it stopped you from getting a call and being certified? And then he says, Otten hesitated. Then he says, no, I'd do the same thing. But I have one regret, and this is how he puts it, that my children all fell from the faith. And then he says, I wonder how many others fell from the faith. Now that's how the thesis concludes, which he did for Northwestern. Well, of course, we came out, when I first found out about it, I published corrections on that issue. Well, that point he did correct, on that particular point. But there are many others which he did not correct, and as I say, it's you got to read how he points out there. What's interesting about it, he points out here that Otten was the most significant person in that whole battle for the Bible. The laymen were following him. And yet, we have here the Seminary in Crisis, which is Dr. Jack Preuss on the front page. I mentioned that too. They say nothing about Otten at all. So you get two conflicting views there. Who's right? Who's correct? Well, I analyzed what Buekee had to say, and I point out the different mistakes and errors and how they could possibly call this real scholarship. Just one example. He says, Otten, when he got his first chance to preach at his home church in New York City, he gets up in the pulpit and he blasts away at the seminary. He puts as evidence of that Dr. Walter Bowman, who was vicar there that year. The fact of the matter, it never happened. They said that Otten had to revise his sermon. The fact of the matter is, folks, my first sermon was delivered in Germany in 1953, in Germany. Walter Bowman wasn't even there. And it never happened that I had blasted the seminary from my own church in New York City. Well, that's just one of many, many mistakes that occurred in there. For instance, one with regard to Dr. Robert Preuss and Dr. Jack Preuss. He does rightly point out that there was much duplicity, the lies and deception. And I had said already at that time that if we aren't thoroughly honest as conservatives, someday a young liberal scholar will check the record and he'll find out the duplicity. And Buekee does rightly point that out. He does point out the duplicity and the deception. He mentions Otten also participated in some of those secret meetings. That's not true. And that Otten was part of Jack Preuss's ping pong club. And then when Jack Preuss won in 1950 1969 in Denver, and said, boy, Jack, we really did it. The fact of the matter is, folks, I wasn't even there. I never was part of any ping pong club. Well, I point out those different errors and mistakes. Over here we have Code Word Barbelon. That's a new book I was asked to review. It's called Dangers of the Vatican, the Sons of Loyola, and Their Plan for World Domination. I have the book here. I do review it at considerable length. I first let the author speak for himself. And he comes up with all these wild conspiracy notions. I'm familiar with them. It's either the Jews, the Jesuits, the Trilateralists, whoever they all got. They are the real sinister forces behind world history. Well, after my concluding editorial on it, I says, folks, this is nothing new. When I left the seminary in 1957, 58, my graduate degrees, I decided not to go on for my doctorate degrees because I wanted to continue the battle with the seminary. And Professor Kurt Markman and I, we thought we would do that. But it also afforded me time to do considerable reading. So I not only read Walther and Luther and these good solid like Machen and Oswald T. Allis, but I also read this conspiratorial material, and I came to this conclusion after reading that all. There has always been throughout history a battle between the forces of Christ and Antichrist. And sometimes the devil uses this force, maybe the Jews, maybe the big bankers, maybe the trialists, but basically the real battle in history is between those who accept the Bible and those who reject it. And who is the real Antichrist? The Lutheran Confessions and Martin Luther and the Bible actually says it's really the papacy is the real Antichrist. And on the same page that I have that editorial on Christ versus Satan, where I explain my whole view of these conspiratorial notions, I have here the Christian Travel Guide to World History in the footsteps of Moses, Jesus, Paul, and Luther. I photographed the back cover of it, and I noticed the subtitle of the book is God's Hand in History. I know of no one in our church who had a better grasp of world history than Dr. Henry Koch. He received his PhD at the University of Leipzig in 1919. He was asked to remain, he came from America, he was asked to remain there. He taught at a seminary, started several Lutheran churches. Then he toured widely all over Europe. And that's what we call it, walking in the footsteps of Moses, Jesus, Paul, and Luther. I highly recommend that book to you. It really shows on what is going on in world history. We don't have to be taken over by all these conspiratorial notions. In this book, Code Word Barbelon, they ridicule the Codex Sinaiticus and Tischendorf. Koch studied under some of these scholars responsible for the best texts. And he really points out, no, they don't. They are very helpful. Some of these people, it's only the King James Version. That's the only version that's accurate. Koch points out that's really not the case. Well, I see my time is rapidly passing here. Also, we have here the oldest functioning worship facility in the LCMS. It's a story of a rededication of a church in St. Paul Lutheran Church in New Mali. They will have a rededication. You can read about that. It's the oldest building now, functioning building in the Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod. I have here a thumbnail sketch of C.S. Lewis's troubling theology. Many of them think that he's a great scholar. I point out, no, he actually denied some of the basic doctrines of the Christian faith, contrary to what some of the great. He had much good to say, but he also undermined basic Christian doctrines. Our passage here is, there's a great truth in here. I mean that of Christ and the church. But every one of you, love your wife as you love yourself. And a wife should respect her husband. That's my good Mother's Day closing thought for you, my dear readers.